The Places in the Philippines You Should Never Travel To series. Our country has been in lockdown for a few months now, and I figured why not tell the future travelers on what places in the Philippines you should never find yourself trapped in. If you have traveled here at least once, you would have heard rumors and tales about monsters that feeds on fetuses that are still within the womb of their mothers, women who can bisect their torso from their legs at night and grow bat-like wings, giant men sitting on top of large trees, or the apparition of a lady who was raped and murdered along Bulit Drive. Those are just few of the legends that you will hear in our country, and some of them are not as just stories to scare children from going out at night or some folktale that the crazy hag that lives in the edge of the village warns travelers to watch out. Some of them are the things we hunt, capture, and study. I'll tell you about myself first. I'm Nico, codename Amihan, derived from the Filipino deity of peace and whom lived in the space between the sea and the sky. I lived as an average orphan throughout my life until I graduated as a history major. An average Filipino dude, who initially worked normal jobs such as carrying carts of fresh food in the local market, construction works, serving in fast food restaurants, and at one point was a librarian, which was my most favorite job. So I'm a little bit fit and can handle a punch. After graduating, I worked as an assistant for a local historian who studied the legends of the old tribes and natives of the Philippines. She's the reason I became part of what I will call as the institution. In respect of her privacy, I will call the mentioned historian by her code name, Mayari, the goddess of the moon. I was working for 2 years under her before she introduced me to the institution, a non-government agency that handles all things related to these creatures. This line of work is not public knowledge, and there are a few others like us. The biggest one, albeit still small, would be the government-handled sector, but since the government is greedy and corrupt, they are not as active as us and contracts agencies to do the dirty work. Some might have heard about it, but they have no solid proof that this kind of agency exists. You might ask me, if this is secretive, why would I post about it? Because the last hunt I did will scar me for life, physically and mentally, and this website is weird enough that my superiors might not look into this or think nobody would take this seriously. They might be right, or I could end up dying of COVID even though I don't have the illness, if you know what I mean. As of the moment, I'm blind in one eye and have a 50-50 chance of recovering my sight. I just had surgery after that damned last hunt. I'll recount the events following to that day. The following conversations are spoken in Filipino, but I translated them so everyone can understand, and I will call everyone by their code names for their privacy. Dead babies? Code name Apolaki, derived from the Filipino god of the sun, asked in a nonchalant way. Yes. Hundreds of them, found buried behind the house of a missing couple in Laguna. Code name, Hanan, goddess of morning, replied. She was briefing us about our next assignment. Police reports say that the neighbors heard a number of loud babies crying in their house, and when they investigated, the walls were covered in blood and there was a deep hole in the backyard filled with small red bodies. God bless their soul. She made a sign of the cross. How is this related to us? This doesn't sound like something that we handle. Apolaki replied, he can be kind of heartless and uncaring, but I can sense he was a bit concerned and worried. There's more. Hanan shot him an annoyed glance. The police also found this note. She presented a paper within a clear Ziploc plastic bag and passed it over to me. The note was dirty and had drops of blood around the edges. Some of the words are illegible and it looks like it was written in a hurry. They are not mine, dear Lord, please save my soul. Burn them all. Spawns of Satan, all of them. Children of the devil himself. Dear God Almighty, save my soul. I passed the note to Apolaki, who tried to hide a chuckle under his breath while he was reading. Hanan shot him another stink eye. A bunch of wackos. Probably did illegal abortions and trying to pass it off as supernatural. Neighbors probably know about it but kept silent to keep their own dirty little secrets. Besides, God and Satan doesn't exist. Am I right, Nico? Apolloki punched my shoulder and snorted. He did have a point, albeit poorly delivered. Hanan stood up and was about to say something when Mayari cut her off. Code names, Apolloki, she said in a stern voice. Apolloki bowed his head and mumbled a yes ma'am. Mayari turned to me and handed me an envelope. Amihan, you, Apolloki, and Hanan will investigate the house and look for clues the police could not find. You can ask the locals but refrain from disclosing any information or ask any questions that would lead them to think you are not officials. You will go under the guise as police officers. The local government has already been informed and everything you find out will go directly to us. If any trouble comes from the local police, report immediately so we can handle it. Transactional as always, I thought. I opened the envelope and it includes the police reports, information about the neighbors and the missing couple, and pictures of the scene. One photograph caught my attention immediately. It was the picture of the couple as they stood in front of the house. The photo looked old and worn out, suggesting it was taken long before phones were used to take pictures. This is the only photo of the couple? I asked, curious why there are no other recent photos. Yes. The couple were recluses and didn't interact with the people except when going out to buy at the market. Neighbors also say that they still look like how they look in that photo. Hanan answered. I flipped through the photos and saw the picture of the babies piled in a deep hole. It was disturbing to say the least, and that's coming from someone who had to salt a twitching disembodied lower half of a woman. Where are the bodies of the babies? I asked, hoping they at least got a proper funeral. In the chambers. Mayari answered, and hearing that made my blood boil. Why? Those are kids, for crying out loud. Why would you dump them in the chambers? I said, angry they would treat the dead babies as monsters. And don't give me the bullshit that this is from higher ups, we all know that was you called. I told Mayari accusingly. She held my gaze while I ranted and she did not flinch even once. Apolloki and Hanan stared at me in surprise, first time seeing me causing an uproar. You read the note. I cannot risk them turning and causing a massacre. You of all people should know about that. She knew that would shut me up. She knew my history. She knows why I became an orphan. She knew I would not fight back. Putangina. I said as I tried my best not to slam my fist on the table. Then fucking have them blessed. It doesn't work that way, Amihan. I hired you to do your job and you do it well. Don't make me pull you out of this case along with Apolloki and Hanan. I hated how she can stay calm even during confrontations. Yo, man, calm down. Apolloki interjected. Mayari, we will do our jobs without problem, don't worry. Amihan is just, he shot me a quick look, concerned about the kids, you know how he is. If there's nothing else, my office is open and feel free to ask questions. Report directly to me. Briefing dismissed. With that, Mayari stood up and left the briefing room. The tension still lingered in the air and Apolloki let out a big sigh. Hanan collected the reports and was trying her best to act like she was not uncomfortable. What the fuck was that, man? Apolloki scratched his head. I hate the chambers as much as you, but Mayari did have a solid argument. Just thinking about the chambers gives me the creep, plus it stinks in there. I, for one, am not excited to go to this house. Hanan supplied. We collected our things and discussed our plans. We will leave in 2 days after preparations as we were based in Manila. During those 2 days, we conducted individual investigations and divided the additional work and shopping. There was already a nearby place we would stay for the days we will be investigating the area. We had zero clue what we will be facing, and the MO does not match any recent cases. 2 days passed by in a blur and our investigations was not fruitful. We discovered that the couple had no registers in the government, no medical reports, no relatives that we can find, and no data matching them to other cases in the collected database of other agencies. In short, we don't have a clue what we will face. Apolaki was the designated driver and the drive to the remote village in the outskirts of Laguna took only a few hours. We discussed different theories and the most sensible one is that they were doing illegal abortions for the locals and neighboring towns. Not surprising as all forms of abortion is still illegal in the Philippines and people who are desperate will find ways. I thought about the babies in the chamber and how they could be inside garbage bags, rotting, or they could have turned into a tiyanak, which based on local legends are babies who died before baptizing, aborted fetuses transformed to take revenge, or the offspring of a woman and a demon. They are nasty creatures that prey on humans, taking the form of a crying baby in the forest to lure out people who dares to investigate, only to change back and consume those who find them. We arrive at our temporary home, which is a small apartment in the neighboring town, about 30-minute drive to the scene of the crime. It was still early, and we had time to investigate straight away, which was our plan. After setting up our things and gear, we headed out. The village was a small quiet town where people minded themselves. They weren't particularly welcoming of travelers and non-natives, which is a contrast to the hospitality of Filipinos. They peeked out of their homes as our car passed by, going into their homes and shutting their doors as soon as we were inside. It took us a few minutes to find the house, a small wooden cottage that resembled a treehouse more than a home. There was no electricity in their area and water was gathered in the fresh spring north of the village, just beyond the bottom of the mountain that hugged the village. I stepped out of the car and into the sun that scorched the ground. I should have brought an umbrella, I thought as I moved to the shade of trees while Apolaki tried to find a shaded area to park the car. Hanan stood beside me and stared at the house. "This place doesn't sit right with me," she mentioned as she rummaged her bag for her camera. I didn't answer her and I scoured the area for the nearest neighbor. The nearest one was a few meters away and a woman who had an inflated belly stood at the door. "She's probably pregnant," I thought to myself. I walked towards her and she immediately went into her house upon noticing that I was going to her. I knocked on the door and nobody answered. "Ma'am, I'm with the police. I just have a few questions," I said as I knocked on the fragile wooden door adorned with protective talismans and religious symbols. A cross hung in the middle, Jesus carved in aging wood. I was about to knock again when a man opened the door halfway and glared at me. "We already talked with 3 different policemen, what do you want from us?" he said in an annoyed voice. He clearly didn't want me there. "I just have a few questions, sir, we won't be long," I said as I reached out for a handshake. He didn't take my hand. "I'm Ami Han and I'm investigating what happened here, in that house." I pointed on the house where Apolaki and Hanan stood. Apolaki smiled and waved. The man stepped outside and as he opened the door, I saw the woman in the back with 2 kids hugging her thighs. "Is that your wife and kids?" I asked and he slammed the door shut, the cross almost falling from where it hung. He did not answer the question. "What do you need?" he asked impatiently. He clutched a rosary in one of his hands and the other on the door jamb. "Do you know the couple who live in that house?" "No, they don't go out." "Were you the one who investigated and reported to the police?" "It was my wife. She was the one who found the house like that. I was at work at that time, and when I came back, a bunch of people were outside, and the police was already there. Can I talk to your wife about it too? I asked, hoping to talk to someone who actually found the scene. No, he answered immediately and forcefully. I can speak for her, she's already stressed, I don't want you stressing her more. I understand. I nodded and was trying to hide my frustration. I asked him about the events. He recounted what his wife saw that day. The sun was setting when his wife heard loud banging sounds coming from the house, then silence before she heard a baby crying. It was not news to them to hear crying, as there was always a baby crying in the house, especially at night, which usually ended after a few minutes. He noted that they never saw a baby with the couple whenever they go out. What caused his wife to investigate was because after the loud banging, the crying did not stop for about 30 minutes, and his wife got worried something might have happened to the couple. Stupid woman, I told her never to go near that house for whatever reason. His wife knocked on the door and nobody answered. The crying continued and only got louder as she banged on the door. She tried to open the door and found that it was not locked. She entered but didn't saw anyone inside the house. And the crying baby? I asked. There was no baby there. The crying stopped when she got in the house, and she left immediately screaming after she saw the blood on the walls and floor. He looked up to the dimming sun, which was almost setting behind the mountains. How about the hole in the backyard? Who found them? The other locals, after my wife called for them. He looked at his hand where he held the rosary. His hand was slightly trembling. Do you need anything else? There were rumors that the couple did abortions. His head looked back up at me immediately, fear bubbling in his eyes. He licked his lips as sweat dripped down from his forehead to his cheeks. That's not true. He answered, too fast, too forceful. I noticed how he clenched the rosary harder, pinching a bead between his thumb and index finger. I never saw anybody going to their house, not locals, not other people from other villages. Nobody. He said, spit flying out of his mouth. All right, I believe you. I didn't believe him. The sun was setting by the minute, and I asked a different question in order to defuse the situation. He calmed down a little when I asked him about the other locals who found the hole, but he was still on edge. He was obviously desperate to point a finger to someone else for me to hound. I tried to ask if they ever talked to the couple, and he shook his head and looked up at the sky. He was hiding something, that was clear to me. No more questions, it's going to be night soon. Go home and find someone else to ask about that damned house. He turned and shut the door on my face. I heard a lock click behind the house, and I knew I could take down this door with one good solid kick, locked or not. I walked towards Apolaki and Hanan. That looked like it went well. Apolaki said sarcastically. He didn't want to say much, figures. Let's just go in and get this over with, I don't want to stay here after dark. Hanan grumbled, tossing me a flashlight and a pair of gloves. I wore the gloves and opened the door. It creaked as it revealed the interiors of the derelict house. It was a small room that went straight to the bedroom. A bed lay on far right of the door. It was disheveled and the sheets were still crumpled with red stains. A cabinet stood beside the bed, and the old wooden frame had splashes of red across it. The kitchen was visible further in, where a table and 2 chairs stood. Behind them 2 doors were closed, most likely one going to the bathroom and the other to the backyard. We stepped inside, and it reeked of burned wood and incense. The locals probably had a ritual to bless the house of evil spirits, a common practice done in most rural and some urban areas. It's debated whether it works or not, but in our line of work and investigation, those kind of rituals does not show any effect, or if it does it's very minimal and might keep away creatures depending on the kind due to the smell rather than its ritualistic belief. I opened the cabinet and it had clothes neatly tucked, a few bottles of oils and fermented herbs, books about the Bible, herbs and spices, and a small notebook secretly tucked behind the religious figurines of Mary. I took the notebook and was about to open it when Hanan took it from me. "I'll handle this one, I'm better at things like this, can you check the backyard instead? And Apolaki, don't you dare leave me alone in here." I rolled my eyes and followed her instructions and walked towards the kitchen where Apolaki was studying the red splashes of blood. I opened the door on the right and the smell of feces wafted. I heard Apolaki gag behind me and I immediately closed the door. It was rare for areas to still have no plumbing, but guessing from how this house looks, it probably still had the old outhouse-like style dry toilets and was never cleaned when the couple disappeared. I decided to investigate it later. I opened the door to the left and the view of a plain vegetable garden greeted me. It was a bit larger than the area of the house and different plants still thrived around the growing weeds due to neglect. I scoured for the infamous hole and failed to find it, thinking the locals or authorities might have already filled it up, which will set us back in our investigation. A single mango tree stood at the back of the garden. Its trunk was wide and small shrine was placed on the bottom. There were no religious symbols or icons on the shrine, but a decaying bird was on there. Maggots feasted on the bird, and once upon a time, I might have cried if I saw that as a kid, but I have seen too many things that will keep anyone up at night for it to have any effect on me. I looked behind the tree and there it was, the deep hole where the bodies of fetuses were found. The hole stank of rot and surprisingly a faint smell of gasoline. There was no rain to clear it out and the red stains of blood still painted the walls of the hole. It was empty and I could just imagine the fetuses of different sizes all piled together in there. There was no shovel in the area and I suspected it might have been dug by hand, which could have taken hours or even days for it to be made that deep. It was at least 5 to 6 feet from the ground and 3 feet in diameter. Images of bloodied and scraped hands digging night and day to get it that deep passed through my mind. There was nothing else of interest in the area and I sighed, thinking we might have to spend a few more days before we can find out what happened here. I stood up to go back to the house when I heard movement above me. It was a faint sound of rustling on an otherwise windless day, too quiet for it to be the wind, too precise for it to be an animal. Someone or something was up there, watching me. I slowly put my hands on the side of my chest where my gun was hidden, avoiding to make any sudden actions. Sudden actions are what gets you killed. I drew the gun and looked up, pointing it towards the dimming sky, but there was nothing there. No birds or curious cats, no wind shaking the leaves. Nothing. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I was holding and holstered the gun back. I stood and walked back to the house. I turned to take one last look if I missed anything, and that's when I noticed the shrine. The decaying bird that I saw was nowhere to be found. Something took it while I was investigating the hole. The rustling I heard was not my imagination. I stepped inside the house to inform my partners about what I found and what happened when Hanan looked at Apolaki and I in a state of shock. "It's not hers," she said as she handed us the notebook she was reading. "God save her soul." "What do you mean?" Apolaki looked at her, confused to what she's saying. "This house is not theirs and the couple never lived here," she explained as I was trying to read the passage she was pointing at. "They kept me here to give birth to his child. They said it would be the child of the Lord, but they fooled me. That's why I kept getting miscarriages. I was not giving birth to the second coming of Christ. I was giving birth to their demons." Hanan pulled us outside to get back to the car while the sky was getting darker by the minute. We found the car and Apolaki cursed out loud when we saw the tires were flat with bite marks and the exterior scratched as if whatever did it was trying to open it up. She was a prisoner here, Hanan said. Her voice sounded defeated and angry. I looked up at the edge of the mountain as the sun disappeared and the sky was changing from red to black. She was kept here to birth an army of monsters.